metadata or documentation is critical to analyzing the data. The data that I'm talking about are just gigabytes and gigabytes of raw numbers, ones, two, threes, fours. If you brought it up on a screen or printed it out, it would take up bookshelves worth of paper of just numbers. Absolutely meaningless without documentation. The documentation, therefore, indicates what is meant by all those ones and zeros. Everyone can take eggs, flour, milk, butter, and sugar. But it takes a recipe to put those together to make a cake or an omelet or whatever. The raw ingredients are the data. The recipe would be the metadata. You can do a lot of things with the data depending on the metadata.
In my field of the geosciences, we work with a lot of map data. And 20 years ago, when you looked at a map, you had not only the data, which is the points and lines on a map, but you also had documentation about the data. And that was all the text around the edges of the map that told you who made the map, when they made the map, and some of the processes they used. What was their source data? How many observations they made. Now, as maps become more digital, you don't have that maps around to give you information about the data. That's why we use metadata to document what work went into that map and who did it and when it was done.
In my field, metadata is something generally external to data. The data itself is an electronic file, and the metadata is a separate electronic file, or in some cases, even a hard copy file.
We're working to get the metadata embedded into the data so that as you copy the digital files from one place to another, the metadata always travels with it. I know of data sets that don't have any documentation, and once those are copied 3 or 4 times to 3 or 4 different people, you lose all lineage back to the original source material. That's why it's important to document the data. If possible, have that documentation or metadata embedded in the data itself.
We have a checklist for things that need to be included in that documentation file, a minimum set of things such as who was the principal investigator of this study, what the universe of respondents are. Are we interviewing just children, citizens, immigrants, etc.? We make sure that when we receive a data file and documentation that it is clean, that it is very clear what question is being asked and what the range of responses are. We have to codify those responses, and that codification process is what is the meat of our documentation, and that's why in social science the documentation is literally called a code book.
As a geographic information specialist, I am usually working with the data as the data are being developed. I am working with the geologist who went out in the field, made observations, and is putting together a map. So I, along with the geologist, work on compiling metadata or documentation for that map data. We record when the map was started, who worked on it, and as you mentioned, the code book, there are many codes that go into a map to describe the nature of the materials in the subsurface, the types of information that were collected, observations that were made. All of those have codes in the database, and all those codes need to be documented in the metadata.
The reason it's important to standardize metadata is so that it can be used, shared, and reused by anyone. So the problem I have with standards is that they are always changing. Standards are good while they are being used, but they inherently have obsolescence built into them.
In the geospatial data field, the metadata standards have evolved over time. They've gone from a standard developed for the United States to an international standard to an add-on to the US standard to bring it up to the international standard. It's always changing, but at the core of it, there are half a dozen fields that transfer from one to the other. And those are some of the ones that we always try to capture first, that these are the basic elements of a metadata document that always need to be completed.
And I would say that in my field with social science quantitative data, the pure vanilla, the most basic elements of documentation would be the parts that describe what is being collected.